The horrific murder that shocked all of Canada happened by sheer chance, triggered by the pathological lies of a criminal who got tangled in a web of his own deceit. Brett Ryan was born in 1980 in Toronto into a large, close-knit family. Besides him, the Ryan couple had 3 more sons, older Christopher and Leland and younger AJ. The parents, who advocated for a healthy lifestyle, tried to instill the right values in their children. The head of the family worked at a newspaper and moonlighted as a fitness coach in his spare time. The mother devoted herself to housekeeping and growing flowers, which was her passion. The woman had to be strict, sometimes even harsh in raising 4 boys, while the father was known for his gentleness and restraint. Each of the sons followed his own path in life. Chris worked as a conductor and was very modest. Leland found his calling in photography and music, and Brett was always described as a gregarious, cheerful guy. Chapter 2. Brett's Academic and Financial Woes. After finishing school, Brett enrolled at the University of Toronto but quickly encountered difficulties with his studies. The young man went through 2 painful breakups with girls, after which he couldn't focus at all on preparing for exams and eventually dropped out of college. He watched with envy as his friends and classmates built relationships, got married, and achieved success, while he couldn't get anything right. This bred a sense of failure in Brett. After getting a job as a painter, the guy realized this wasn't for him. At the same time, Brett loved himself, strived to look good, and spent a lot of money on his own needs and on girls. Because of this, he accumulated a large debt, 60,000 Canadian dollars, which he had no way to repay. Creditors started demanding their money back, which plunged Brett into a deep depression. The young man felt like a total loser, but never confessed his problems to anyone. Chapter 3. Brett's bank robbery plan. Desperately trying to find a way out of his predicament and quickly get his hands on a large sum of money, Brett resolved to rob a bank. On October 20th, 2007, he set his plan in motion. The guy chose a financial institution not far from his house. To disguise himself, he wrapped his face in bandages and faked an injury to his left arm. Pretending to limp and carrying the stack of papers, Brett entered the bank posing as a sick man. Approaching the teller, he handed the cashier a note demanding money and threatening that he had a weapon hidden in his bandages. The frightened employee quickly gave the robber all the cash from the register, but it turned out to be just a little over $1,000. Although Brett wasn't happy with this amount, he decided not to draw extra attention, swiftly grabbed the money, and vanished from the crime scene. Despite the security cameras recording the robbery, Brett managed to avoid arrest. Feeling a sense of impunity, he continued robbing banks, but in other parts of the city. Changing his disguise tactics to a hat and a fake beard, the young man became more cautious. In total, Brett robbed 12 banks, netting over $28,000 in loot. Chapter 4. The Unmasking and Imprisonment of the Robber. Eventually, the police managed to track down the brazen robber, and on June 20th, 2008, 28-year-old Brett was arrested during an attempted robbery. The guy's family was in deep shock, as Brett had once volunteered at a children's hospital and had now turned into a criminal. The court sentenced him to 5 years in prison. While serving his sentence, experts evaluated the convict's mental state and found no signs of aggression or propensity for violence. Throughout his time, Brett never used prohibited substances and had no mental disorders. Moreover, due to his exemplary behavior, he was granted parole after 2 years. The prison staff were simply charmed by this pleasant, charismatic, and hard-working young man. In their opinion, he had just made a fatal mistake due to the burden of debt and deserved a second chance. Brett's profile stated that he was a model prisoner with minimal risk of reoffending. Chapter 5. Brett's attempts to start a new life. According to the terms of his parole, Brett had to undergo a course of psychotherapy and report any problems he encountered in his family relationships, with girls, or at work. After all, these were the factors that could trigger him to relapse. But despite his sincere intentions to start a new life, reality proved to be much more complicated. The debts didn't go away, and there was no way to pay them off. Finding a job with a criminal record turned out to be extremely difficult. No one wanted to hire an ex-convict even as a painter. In desperation, Brett declared bankruptcy. His parents came to the rescue, supporting their son financially. This allowed him to resume his studies at the university, but this time in the information technology department. Brett also continued to visit a psychotherapist by court order and diligently tried to put his life back together. It was during therapy that he was advised to be more honest and open with those around him. Chapter 6. Brett and Kristen's fateful meeting. One day in September 2011, Brett's friend set him up on a blind date with a pretty girl named Kristen Baxter. She worked as a physiotherapist, lived in her own apartment with her little dog, and loved to travel. A spark instantly ignited between Brett and Kristen. They immediately hit it off and felt a mutual attraction. The young people were united by common interests. Brett, like Kristen, adored animals and travel. Soon they started dating. The couple spent a lot of time together, attended sports events, and went on hikes. Brett even accompanied Kristen and her family on a vacation to the Bahamas. Plus, the girl's dog immediately took a liking to him. It seemed that Brett's life was finally getting back on track, and he was no longer drawn to dubious ventures. He longed for a quiet and cozy life next to his beloved girlfriend. In January 2013, Brett moved into Kristen's apartment, marking a new stage in their relationship. The couple began to think about getting married. Chapter 7. Hiding the truth from his beloved. A new life began for Brett. The young man who had grown up in a quiet suburb was now immersed in the bustle of vibrant city life with its numerous restaurants, shops, and interesting places. The young couple enjoyed visiting cozy eateries together and taking evening swims in the pool. However, as it turned out, all this time, while Brett's brothers were building their careers and becoming independent, he was only studying, living on his parents' money. The couple often traveled to warm countries together. Brett's father suddenly passed away. The young man temporarily moved in with his mother to help with the funeral arrangements and support her during this difficult time. That's when he confessed to Susan that he was madly in love with Kristen and dreamed of marrying her. However, he didn't have the money for a decent engagement ring, so he hesitated with the proposal. Touched by her son's words, his mother handed him money for an expensive ring. Brett bought a luxurious diamond ring and proposed to Kristen. Beaming with happiness, the girl said yes. The couple immersed themselves in pleasant wedding preparations. Brett even looked for side jobs to be able to surprise his beloved and shower her with gifts, but these were insignificant sums. The guy had no idea how he would provide for a family in the future. He carefully concealed from his fiancée his problems with the law, bankruptcy, and debts. Abandoning his futile studies, Brett focused on finding a decent job. Chapter 8. A failed attempt to get a job. At the beginning of 2016, fortune finally smiled upon Brett. He got a good job in the field of information technology. The guy joyfully shared this news with Kristen, and the couple decided to celebrate the occasion with family. However, as soon as his new employer learned about his criminal past, they immediately refused to hire him. This was a crushing blow to Brett's ego. Not wanting to upset his beloved, he decided not to tell her about yet another failure. Instead, Brett pretended that he would be working remotely from home. While Kristen was getting ready for work, he pretended to be working at the computer. The girl was happy that they would finally get on their feet and Brett would start earning good money. She enthusiastically prepared for the wedding, scheduled for September 16, 2016, choosing the most beautiful and expensive options, as they could now supposedly afford it. A luxurious banquet hall was booked for the ceremony. The pre-wedding bachelor party was planned to be celebrated at a posh ski resort. The couple even started looking at a spacious and cozy house where they dreamed of settling after the wedding, as they were tired of being cramped in a small apartment. Susan was overjoyed, believing that her son had finally gotten on his feet, graduated from university, and found a high-paying job. The woman eagerly anticipated the wedding and Brett's move into his own home. Chapter 9. Brett's lies exposed, but in reality, this was all a blatant lie. Brett had nothing to his name but deceit. He got so tangled up in a web of his own fabrications that he couldn't extricate himself from it. In desperate attempts to get money, the guy took any side job he could find and even helped his mother around the house for pay. He came to her every day, looking for things to fix or do around the house to receive financial rewards. Susan found her son's insistence suspicious, as he hung around her house all day long, constantly tinkering with something, instead of working. If Brett was earning as well as he claimed, why did he need these odd jobs, the woman wondered. She started asking her son uncomfortable questions, which he initially tried to dodge. But then, remembering the therapist's advice about the importance of honesty, Brett finally dared to confess his troubles to his mother. He begged Susan for substantial financial assistance, promising to keep looking for work. However, his mother was extremely disappointed with her son's life failures. She was filled with indignation that Brett hadn't even managed to finish university and get an education. Susan flatly refused to give him money and threatened to tell Kristen everything. Chapter 10. The Birth of a Criminal Plan. His mother's harsh words infuriated Brett. He was seized by a panic fear that Kristen would leave him if she learned the truth. The guy was desperate to avoid this at all costs. More than anything in the world, he feared ending up on the streets again, without his beloved girlfriend, and returning under his mother's care. Brett didn't want to feel like a miserable loser for the rest of his life. And then a monstrous plan took shape in his head. Since his criminal record prevented him from legally purchasing firearms, Brett decided to get a crossbow. To avoid attracting undue attention, the guy bought a used crossbow for cash. The next day, Brett went to his mother's house again, supposedly to help with repairs for money. Chapter 11. The Bloody Massacre. On August 25th, 2016, Kristen woke up early as usual and went to work to see her patients. Brett pretended to stay home and work, but in fact, he started getting ready to go to his mother's. Suddenly, it dawned on the guy. To avoid suspicion, he needed an alibi. The resourceful Brett crafted a device that imitated him working at the computer by periodically pressing keys. In addition, he set up automatic email sending at a specific time. Next, Brett packed all the necessary items for his disguise into a sports bag, including clothes and a wig. Slipping out of the house unnoticed through the fire escape to avoid being captured by surveillance cameras, the guy headed to Susan's place. Just as stealthily, in a mask and wig so that no one would recognize him, Brett arrived at his mother's house. On the doorstep, he took off all his disguise and went inside. Once again, Brett tried to talk to his mother and convince her to help him with money, but Susan was unyielding. A fierce argument broke out between them. The woman insisted that her son confess his lies to Kristen himself. Otherwise, she threatened to expose him on her own. Meanwhile, the quarrel flared up with renewed vigor. Sensing something was wrong, Susan took advantage of the moment when Brett briefly stepped out and urgently called her eldest son, Chris. She begged him to come over and help deal with the conflict with Brett. And Brett went to the garage for a reason. He had hidden a crossbow there in advance. Returning with the weapon, the guy started fiddling with it, setting everything up for the shot. This task turned out to be not so simple and took some time. Suddenly, his mother entered the garage. In a fit of blind rage, Brett grabbed the first tool he could find and struck Susan twice, hitting her cheek and ear. The woman screamed in pain, shocked that her own son had raised a hand against her. A fight broke out between them. During the scuffle, both fell to the floor and rolled around in a tangle, knocking everything down in their path. Brett groped for a long, dirty rag and, without much thought, strangled his 63-year-old mother with it. Only after committing the deed did it begin to dawn on him that everything had gone wrong. The perfect murder had turned into a nightmare. The guy suddenly remembered that Chris, summoned by his mother, was about to arrive. Upon seeing her body, his older brother would immediately realize whose handiwork this was. Without much hesitation, Brett decided to get rid of Chris as an unwanted witness. He jumped up, grabbed the crossbow, and started fiddling with it again. Now a plan to kill his brother was brewing in Brett's head. Having prepared everything for the new crime, He lurked in the garage, waiting for Chris. Soon, the unsuspecting 42-year-old man crossed the threshold in search of his mother. At that moment, Brett silently approached him from behind and shot him point-blank in the back of the head. Chris instantly fell dead. Brett dragged his bloodied body over to his mother's corpse and covered them with a tarp. The guy rushed to grab his bag of clothes to quickly change and flee. Unexpectedly, Brett's younger brother, 29-year-old AJ, appeared at the doorstep of his mother's house, coming for a visit. For Brett, this was a real catastrophe. He frantically pondered what to do next: change clothes and run, or stay and kill AJ too. Brett feared that his younger brother, upon discovering the bodies, would immediately call the police, and then he would certainly be caught. This pushed the guy to commit yet another gruesome murder. After tracking down AJ, Brett followed him, holding the crossbow at the ready. He crept up to his unsuspecting victim with the intention of cunningly shooting him in the back of the head, just like Chris. But this time, something went wrong. AJ sensed danger and noticed the armed Brett. A life-and-death fight broke out between the brothers. At some point, Brett managed to wound AJ, hitting him in the neck with the crossbow. AJ screamed in pain and fled. He ran out of the house, leaving a trail of blood in the sand, and collapsed exhausted in the driveway. It turned out that there was another brother in the house, 39-year-old Leland, who had been carelessly sleeping this whole time. He was awakened by AJ's horrific scream. Looking out the window, Leland saw his bloodied brother on the path. The man rushed to the phone to call 911, but he didn't make it. At that very moment, a crazed Brett pounced on him. A fierce fight broke out between the brothers, which rolled through the entire house, turning it into a bloody mess. Taking advantage of the moment when Brett was distracted, the wounded Leland managed to slip out unnoticed, crawl to the neighbors, and lose consciousness on their doorstep. The good people immediately called the police. Meanwhile, the enraged Brett dashed back into the yard, catching a glimpse of the wounded AJ, who was trying to crawl away, bleeding. Obsessed with the desire to finish off his younger brother at all costs before he attracted the neighbors' attention, Brett chased after him. Chapter 12. The finale of the bloody drama. As he pursued AJ, Brett suddenly saw that Leland had managed to fully rat him out to the neighbors. From that point on, the guy no longer had any chance of salvation. The police were about to arrive at the crime scene and put an end to his bloody odyssey. The brilliant plan for the perfect murder had crumbled to pieces. In despair, Brett decided to surrender. Unhurriedly, he returned to his mother's house, grabbed a bottle of water, and settled on the porch, patiently waiting for the arrival of law enforcement. When the first patrol cars and an ambulance pulled up, the medics immediately pronounced Susan and Chris dead. AJ was still showing signs of life, but was in extremely critical condition. On the way to the hospital, he died from his injuries. As for Leland, although he was hurt, he survived. He was urgently hospitalized and provided with the necessary medical care. Over time, the man began to recover. Chapter 13. The shocking truth for Kristen Brett was arrested at the crime scene and faced terrible charges of triple first-degree murder and attempted murder of his brother. The news stunned Kristen, as there were only 3 weeks left until the wedding. The unfortunate bride learned the horrifying truth about her beloved for the first time: his criminal past, conviction for robbery, financial problems, lack of a job, and the gruesome murder of his own family. How could she have lived under the same roof with this monster for so long? The shocked girl immediately canceled the wedding. Returning to the apartment, Kristen discovered the contraption Brett had crafted himself for his alibi. Not understanding what this strange gadget was, she mistook it for an explosive device and frantically called the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, promptly evacuated the building's residents, and began cautiously examining the mysterious device. It soon became clear that it posed no danger, but the cops were amazed by Brett's extraordinary ingenuity and scrupulousness. One couldn't deny his intelligence and inner strength, which unfortunately he had channeled in the wrong direction. If only Brett had chosen the right path in life from a young age, his potential could have brought much good to society. Chapter 14. Admission of guilt and sentencing. At the court hearing, Brett decided to plead guilty. He made a deal with the prosecution, agreeing to have his actions qualified as a triple second-degree murder. Trying to mitigate the sentence, the guy claimed that he had only planned to scare his mother with the crossbow and have a serious conversation with her. Allegedly, he wanted Susan to finally understand and support him. But unfortunately, everything got out of control. Brett swore that he had not intended to do anything to his brothers. They had simply ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, the prosecution insisted otherwise. In their firm belief, the defendant had planned from the very beginning to brutally deal with his mother, not just talk to her. The prosecutors argued that Brett had taken the crossbow with him specifically to kill Susan, and therefore must face severe responsibility. As a result, the guy was found guilty of first-degree murder of his mother and second-degree murder of his brothers. The court handed down a harsh sentence: 3 life terms with the right to parole no earlier than 25 years. In addition, Brett was sentenced to 10 years for the attempted murder of his brother Leland. All punishments are to be served simultaneously. This means that the guy will only be able to seek early release in a quarter of a century. The sole surviving brother Leland greeted the verdict with relief. Despite all the pain and bitterness of loss, he sincerely respected Brett for his expressed remorse. In Leland's deep conviction, his younger brother was not a bad person at heart, but had unfortunately become hopelessly lost in life. Brett had stepped onto the slippery path of deceit and eventually got completely mired in the quagmire of his own lies. He could no longer extricate himself from it, which led to a terrible tragedy. Brett Ryan's horrific story serves as a warning to us all. It vividly demonstrates how seemingly small lies and concealing the truth can lead to dire consequences. At some point, the lies grow, accumulating new details, and become uncontrollable, ruining not only the deceiver's life, but also the lives of their loved ones. Brett had every chance to get on the right track after his first prison term. He had the support of his beloved girlfriend and family. He could have gotten an education and found a job. However, the guy chose a different path, the path of untruth, which ultimately led to a terrible tragedy and destroyed more than one life. It doesn't matter whether Brett acknowledged his mistake sincerely or if his remorse was merely a way to soften the sentence. What's much more important is what conclusions he will draw himself while serving his life sentence. Will he be able to rethink his life and at least try to become a better version of himself? Only Brett himself knows the answer. However, his story definitely makes us reflect on our own actions. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize once again, honesty and responsibility are not just pretty words, but a vital necessity. It's important to value our loved ones, trust them, and share our problems with them. After all, it's much easier to overcome difficulties together and find a way out, even from seemingly hopeless situations. Only on a solid foundation of truth, trust, and mutual support can we build a happy future. And perhaps had Brett Ryan known this, he would have never set foot on the wrong path that led him behind bars. This story should serve as a lesson and reminder to all of us that our most precious treasure in life is our family and loved ones. So let's cherish them, respect them, and above all, be honest with ourselves, because self-deception is the first step towards a real-life tragedy. In the midst of winter, when families gather to celebrate peace and joy, a sinister shadow loomed over the picturesque town of Dover, Arkansas. It was December 1987, a time meant for festivity and love, but for one family, it became a scene of overwhelming horror. This is the chilling tale of the Christmas killer Ronald Gene Simmons, a man who transformed the season of giving into a time of unspeakable tragedy. But what leads a person to destroy what they once cherished? What darkness lies within the human mind that can turn a father into a monster? From decorated war hero to a man convicted of the worst family massacre in American history, we'll delve into the depths of a mind clouded by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator became fatally blurred. To understand the mind behind the massacre, we must journey back to the origins of Ronald Gene Simmons. His story begins not with violence, but with a seemingly ordinary life, marked by service and family. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois. His father died of a stroke when Ronald was 3. His mother got married again in less than a year to a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who was transferred to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons's early childhood, but it was a life that took a turn towards discipline and commitment when Ronald dropped out of school and enlisted in the United States Navy in 1957, and later the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served with distinction. Over a 22-year career, he received several commendations, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibarri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been the assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence, up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing. But what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family, the desperation to conceal his illicit acts, or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure, ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair mini-mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987, because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas, by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas, on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. And he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives, one by one. Later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His 3 other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky, were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday visit, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son, Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law, Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son, Trey, was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter, Sheila, her 33-year-old husband, Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally, his 21-month-old grandson, Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions a stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner, Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Mini Mark, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Mini Mart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice, and wounded her in the office of Woodline Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodline Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran, to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons's own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simmons' life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family, coupled with a need for dominance, may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings, "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment. Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger, as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions. The second trial for the murders of his 14 family members began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only added to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter Sheila was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell," after she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police. On February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25th, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance, coupled with deep-seated issues likely stemming from his abusive behavior within the family, set the stage for tragedy. Simmons' military discipline, juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life, created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence. And when his authority was threatened, possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons' defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they are going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there: isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simmons' story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said, "He had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk." Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in 1981 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? Tell me in the comments. The case of Lisa Cecilia Hardum. the fiancé of a tyrant who turned a luxury apartment into a prison. Controlling behavior in couple relationships, unfortunately, is not uncommon and quite dangerous. It manifests itself when a person tries to subjugate and forcibly adapt their other half to their own needs through intimidation, demonstrations of strength and power, as well as humiliation and total control. Often the victim, because of the instilled feelings of fear and guilt, does not realize that he or she is in a destructive situation. The story of a young woman named Lisa Cecilia Hardum illustrates what a relationship with a control freak can lead to. She naively believed that she had met the love of her life, but she herself did not notice how her fiancé became a monster who turned their luxurious apartment into a real prison with 24-hour video surveillance. This case provoked an international scandal and was widely covered in the press. The unfortunate Lisa tried to make Lisa look mentally unstable and cold-blooded crime to pass off as an accident or voluntary resignation from life. However, the perpetrator, despite his money and connections, did not manage to escape responsibility. Now let's understand how her beloved man turned into a monster who hid his inhuman attitude behind care. Lisa Cecilia Hardum, biography, family, early years. Our today's heroine was born in Canada on June 12, 1981, in the suburbs of Toronto, and was the second child in the family. Lisa was brought up together with her older brother Jason, with whom she has always been very close. They were raised independently by single mom Joanna. Brother and sister did not remember their father because he left the family when the children were very young and no longer took any part in their lives. Lisa Cecilia grew up as an active and purposeful girl. From an early age, she was involved in sports. Together with her brother, went to the martial arts section, liked to play soccer and volleyball. But her main passion has always been ballet. She daily visited the dance studio where she practiced at the bar for several hours. The girl from childhood was tall and slender, but professional ballet classes required the strictest diet, which had a detrimental effect on the growing body. In adolescence, Lisa developed anorexia on the background of eating disorders. For a long time, she kept silent about her problem, believing that she could cope with everything herself. But when her weight approached critically low values, her mother sounded the alarm and put her daughter in the clinic, where Lisa needed to spend several months to restore health and weight gain. After graduating from school, the girl continued dancing classes and also decided to connect her life with the beauty industry. In parallel with her university studies, she got a job as a perfumer in one of the stores of a large cosmetics chain, and in her spare time, she studied the subtleties of makeup and hairdressing, moving to Australia. In 2005, having celebrated her 24th birthday, Lisa decided to make drastic changes in her life. She wanted to go to the other side of the world, to Australia, and there were several reasons for that. Firstly, she wanted to live in a warmer and milder climate. And secondly, Lisa wanted to see the world. She took a one-year work visa and traveled to another continent. However, with her then flew Joanna, who accompanied her daughter for the first few months to make sure that she was all right, and she settled well in the new place. The mother then returned back to Toronto with peace of mind, making sure her daughter could take care of herself. Lisa settled in Sydney, where she rented a cozy apartment and soon got a job at a local small cosmetology company. After her visa expired, she decided to move to Australia permanently. First, she extended her stay for another year, and then began to prepare the necessary documents to obtain citizenship of this country. Personal life. As for personal life, in this respect, everything was not easy. The fact is that Lisa always preferred to meet with older men. Obviously, not the least role in this played a lack of a father in the family, so she always reached out to more mature men, looking for support and protection in them. In 2006, Lisa successfully interviewed for a job at Sydney Cosmetics and was hired. She soon began in a romantic relationship with a co-worker who was almost twice her age. A few months later, they decided to start living together, and Lisa moved into the apartment of her lover. And after a couple more months, the girl introduced her boyfriend to her mom and brother, and they approved her choice. The couple traveled a lot around the world, rested in the Seychelles in Paris, and also visited the famous carnival in Rio de Janeiro. The man even made Lisa a marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted. But about a year after the engagement, the lovers broke up. Lisa did not go into detail about the reasons for this decision, but hinted that too great a difference in age, however, played in this not the least role. In 2010, Lisa graduated from the Sydney College of Stylists and got a job as a hairdresser in a popular beauty salon, where she quickly won the respect of colleagues and the trust of customers. At the same time, a new boyfriend appeared in her life, but their romance did not last long because Lisa found out that he was married. Destroy someone else's family she was not going to, so she quickly broke off the relationship. But shortly before that, at one of the parties, this guy introduced her friend, a businessman named Simon Gitney. This acquaintance turned out to be fatal for Lisa. Who is Simon Gitney? Simon was born in Maryland in December 1973 in a very religious, large family of immigrants from Lebanon. He had 5 other siblings, whom his parents raised in strictness and obedience. However, Simon from a young age had problems with controlling emotions and outbursts of anger, and he was also possessive, did not tolerate rejection, and often gave the will of his fists. All this eventually led to serious problems with the law. The first time Gitney was behind bars was at the age of 18, when he came to his ex-girlfriend in the store where she worked and began to openly molest her. The store owner interceded for the girl and threw the impudent man out the door, but Simon returned with friends who grabbed the store owner and held him, while Simon beat him severely. That time the guy only served a few months and was released on bail for good behavior afterwards. But 3 years later, he was arrested again, this time on theft charges. However, Simon resisted violently, threw himself into a fight, and bit off one of the policeman's earlobe. He was threatened with a serious prison sentence for this prank, but the pastor of the Lebanese Christian church, of which his entire family was members, interceded. As a result, the young man spent only a year and a half in prison. In 2000, Simon again came to the attention of the police, and this time he was arrested for possession and distribution of illegal substances. But the sentence was again extremely lenient, and he served 2 years out of the 4 assigned to him. On release, Gitney, as it seemed to everyone, took the path of correction. He moved to Sydney, where with a few friends founded a fairly successful business for the production and sale of luxury women's shoes. This business brought a stable high income, so Simon quickly became rich, acquired luxury real estate in a prestigious neighborhood, a premium class car, and carefully tried to hide from everyone his rich criminal past. From his roommates to his lovers. At that party, Simon and Lisa exchanged phone numbers, and soon he called her himself. Their relaxed communication somehow imperceptibly grew into a buddy relationship, and when in January 2010 Lisa complained that she was unhappy with her current living conditions and would like to rent an apartment in another neighborhood, Gitney kindly offered her to live for free in one of the rooms of his luxurious apartment while she was looking for a suitable place to rent. Lisa accepted the offer, although her mother was somewhat alarmed by this turn of events. But Lisa convinced Joanna that it was a temporary measure and that she and Simon are just friends. By the way, she herself at that time thought that the man who so carefully monitors his appearance and adores piercings preferred to build relationships with guys. But this opinion turned out to be wrong. For the first couple of months, Gitney really kept his distance. The young people lived in separate rooms, and there was not even a hint of intimacy or romance between them. But gradually they got closer, the so-called spark, and started a romance which quickly gained momentum. At the time of the beginning of their relationship, Simon was 37 years old, and Lisa, 28. Simon seemed to her a beautiful prince from a fairy tale. He was sociable, cheerful, spoiled his beloved with gifts, and arranged her pleasant surprises. The couple began to appear everywhere together. In particular, they went together to an elite sports club, which Simon attended regularly for many years. Lisa was sure that finally met her true love and will live a long, happy life with the chosen one. She raved about him to her mother, brother, and friends, and had no idea that this fairy tale would soon end. An affectionate tyrant. Just 6 months after the beginning of the relationship, Simon's behavior began to change, but it happened in stages and in such a way that Lisa did not notice anything. thinking that the lover does everything for her own good. He gradually distanced Lisa from friends and family, erased all her personal boundaries, tried to change her views, tastes, and behavior, adjusting them to his needs. In June 2010, shortly after Lisa celebrated her 29th birthday, Simon began to persistently persuade her to quit her job, claiming that she was not valued there and she could find a better paid position. But Lisa loved working at the beauty salon, where she had many regular clients and was happy with her income, so she didn't understand why she should quit her job and refused to do so. Simon was not satisfied with the refusal, and in August of the same year, he showed up at Lisa's salon, having thrown a loud scandal, which actually forced her to write a letter of resignation. Lisa Hardem was shocked by his behavior, but Gattani assured that it would be better, and in general, she can no longer work, because his income will allow them both to live comfortably, nothing to deny themselves. A month and a half later, the couple moved into a new luxury apartment, located on the 15th floor of an elite residential complex. As it later turned out, the room was literally stuffed with hidden surveillance cameras, of which Lisa, of course, did not even guess. Simon gave his beloved an expensive smartphone and laptop, pre-installed on them spyware that allowed him to track all her messages, emails, as well as listen to calls and see all of Lisa's movements. In addition, Simon gained access to her social media accounts and began to discreetly clean lists of friends, delete posts and photos at his discretion, as well as read personal correspondence. Total control. Gattani's control over Lisa increased day by day, but as an experienced manipulator, he made it look as if his girlfriend wanted to do as he told her. Gattani had invaded literally every aspect of her life, leaving no hint of privacy. He forbade Lisa to use cosmetics, claiming that she does too bright makeup, which makes her look vulgar. He also bought her clothes in unsightly clothes in gray and black colors, and all her outfits simply threw away, arguing that they were too revealing, and men would stare at her. From the apartment, Lisa went out only accompanied by her lover. They visited together only those places that he himself chose. Simon even forbade her to visit the gym. Instead, he bought several expensive exercise machines, saying that now she could train at home. Lisa's social media friend lists were dwindling by the day, and eventually Gattani convinced her to delete the accounts. Lisa also had no friends left in real life, and all her contacts and calls were closely monitored. Simon only allowed her to communicate with her mother and brother. Last trip home. In December 2010, Lisa decided to fly to Canada to celebrate Christmas with her family. Simon was going to fly with her, but at the last moment his plans were disrupted because of urgent business matters. He didn't plan to let his friend go alone, but she literally begged him, because she hadn't seen her mom and brother for over a year. In the end, he agreed, but set strict conditions and rules, which she had to strictly follow. Jason and Joanna were shocked at the changes that had happened to Lisa over the past year. She was nothing like the bright and cheerful beauty she had been before. She had literally become her own shadow. There was not a drop of makeup on her face. Her luxurious hair was pulled into a ponytail and hidden under a headdress. Her clothes were baggy, unattractive, and completely black. But it wasn't even the outward changes that were the most frightening. Lisa flinched every time the phone rang and instantly grabbed the receiver. It was one of Simon's conditions. She had to answer immediately, at any time of day, no matter what she was doing at that moment. Lisa stayed at her mother's house all the time, refused to see her friends, and hardly ever went out. Joanna was alarmed and frightened by this behavior of her daughter, and she decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with her. Then Lisa burst into tears and admitted that Simon always knows where she is, with whom she communicates, and what she talks about on the phone. Lisa also revealed that Simon doesn't allow her to work, see her friends, go to the gym, or have any hobbies. In fact, she had no friends left at all. Her mother was shocked. She began to persuade her daughter to stay in Canada, because in Australia she has nothing to keep her. But Lisa said that she loved Simon and did not want to break off the relationship with him. Lisa was sure that this is just a transitional period in their relationship, because they have been together for less than a year, and soon he will calm down and loosen his grip. She also added that her lover cares about her and wishes her only good. Despite pleas from her family to stay and attempts to convince Lisa that the relationship was unhealthy, she decided to move back to Australia to stay with Gitney. Lisa reassured her mother, saying that there was nothing to worry about and that Simon loved her and would not hurt her. Prisoner. After Lisa returned, the situation only got worse. Simon forbade her to leave the apartment, and if they went out together, she had to look only at her feet so as not to meet the eyes of other men. Moreover, Simon began to call Lisa by her second name, Cecilia, because it seemed more decent to him. In the spring of 2011, Lisa began to complain of pain in her leg. It was an old injury received in his youth during ballet classes. But instead of taking her to the hospital, Gitani hired a female physical therapist who came to their home 3 times a week to give her massages. She soon became Lisa's only friend and confidant, to whom Lisa spoke candidly about the difficult situation she found herself in. On June 12th, for Lisa's 30th birthday, Simon decided to throw a party at the most expensive restaurant in Sydney, but among the guests were only Simon's relatives and people from his inner circle. Lisa, on her own birthday, boyfriend did not allow to invite anyone. At the end of the evening, Simon proposed to Lisa by putting a ring on her finger. Hardem responded with consent and then cried, but all present noticed that these were not tears of joy, but rather tears of despair and hopelessness. Back home, Lisa called her mother and informed her of her engagement, sobbing into the phone. But Joanna was not at all happy about it. She began to persuade her daughter to leave this man and, as soon as possible, to return home to Canada. In response, Lisa only asked her mother never to start such conversations on the phone. At that moment, she already realized that the fiancé was listening to the calls, although she did not know for sure. Escape plan. For a while, Lisa tried to distract herself with thoughts of the upcoming wedding and began planning the festivities. When she decided to consult with Simon about something related to the event, he rudely cut her off and told her that he would choose the place, buy her address, and make the guest list. Lisa was utterly crushed, for she had no say even here. During another visit to the physiotherapist, Lisa admitted that she couldn't go on like this, but she couldn't leave because her fiancé wouldn't let her go. Together, they developed a plan according to which Lisa, at each visit of the masseuse, gave her some of her belongings for safekeeping, but did everything so that Simon did not notice anything. On July 28th, Simon left his laptop at home in a hurry, which he usually carried with him everywhere. Lisa took advantage of this and looked into it, and her worst fears were realized. There she found a spyware program, with the help of which the fiancé received all the data from her phone, as well as numerous recordings of her conversations with her mother. But the most horrifying discovery was the surveillance footage from the security cameras located in every room of their apartment. That same day, Lisa, using her physical therapist's phone, called her mother and asked her to come on the next flight to her apartment and take her home. However, Joanna could not leave work so quickly. She needed time to ask for an excuse to switch shifts with one of her colleagues. Afterwards, the woman could never forgive herself for this delay. Back home, Simon immediately realized that his fiancée had taken his laptop and seen the spyware. Lisa cried, trying to figure out why she deserved to be treated that way, but Simon only pointed out that he'd done it for her own good. Accident or murder? The next day, July 29th, a serious conversation took place between the young people, the recording of which was later presented in court. Lisa was in tears and asked to go home, but Gitani calmly and confidently said that this would never happen, asked Lisa to calm down, and claimed that she had mental problems. On the morning of July 30th, 2011, Lisa got up early, got fully dressed, and put her documents and essentials in her purse. She locked herself in the bathroom and called her mother one last time, telling her that if anything happened to her, it would be Simon's fault. Apparently, Lisa wanted to leave the apartment unnoticed while her fiancé slept, but she failed. What happened next can only be guessed. According to neighbors, they heard a scream in the hallway, but did not have time to react because all abruptly hushed. And exactly a minute later, a young woman fell from the balcony of the 15th floor, crashing to her death. Several passers-by on the street also heard the scream and saw a body falling from a height, but did not have time to realize what was happening. According to a guy who was walking his dog that morning and was closest to the scene, he heard a noise and looked up. The eyewitness saw a man holding something large, which he then threw down. When passers-by came to the place of the fall, they saw a young woman lying on the ground, but all attempts to help her were in vain, as she died instantly, having received extensive injuries. 3 minutes later, Gitani, dressed in his pajamas, ran out into the street. He was crying, saying he didn't know how he was going to live his life, and claiming that he hadn't caught his fiancée in time. At first glance, it looked like an accident, but Simon himself was quick to claim that his fiancée had voluntarily passed away. A note in his pocket and a frightening video. Strange things began as soon as the body was taken to the morgue and examined. In different pockets were found fragments of a note torn into small pieces with the text, "There are cameras everywhere in the apartment." Probably Lisa was afraid that Simon might find the message, so she turned the note into a kind of garbage and scattered it in different pockets. A check showed that there were indeed a lot of cameras in the apartment, but the hard disk with recordings could not be found. And Simon claimed that there was no video recording at all. A surveillance camera in the communal hallway, on the other hand, captured something frightening. The short clip shows Lisa running out of the apartment and calling for help, but her fiancé grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and drags her back in. This happened a minute before she fell off the balcony, and it was this scream that the neighbors heard. And Gitani's laptop was found to contain a recording of a conversation he and Lisa had the night before the tragedy, as well as spyware that Simon used to spy on his fiancée. According to Simon, he and Lisa had an argument that morning, and she became hysterical. She ran out into the hallway screaming, but he brought her back because he didn't want to put on a show for the neighbors. In the apartment, he picked up the phone to call her mother, but Lisa ran out to the balcony at that moment and threw herself down, and he ran after her but did not catch her in time. He claimed that she had threatened to take her own life before, but he didn't take her words seriously. But Gitani attributed the spy program to his concern for his fiancée's safety. Trial and sentencing. In the course of the trial, Simon was accompanied by already a new pasta, 22-year-old model Rachel Louise, who was just incredibly similar to his dead fiancée. However, later it was said that the girl just wanted to become famous at the expense of this high-profile case, and therefore willingly talked to the press and appeared on television, saying that Gitani would never raise his hand on a woman. Simon's lawyers tried to convince the court that Lisa suffered from a mental disorder, was prone to hysterics, and could have voluntarily passed away. Even a long history of anorexia and treatment in a clinic came up. The defense also argued that the defendant, being short in stature, simply could not physically lift Lisa, who was taller than him, and also could not throw her off the balcony. But this version was refuted by a trainer from the gym, which Simon had attended regularly for many years. According to the trainer, the defendant worked with heavy weights, was much stronger than he appeared outwardly, and could easily have lifted Lisa. This was also supported by the absence of Lisa's fingerprints on the railing and the glass barrier, as she could not have jumped without leaning on them. Also testifying in court was the physiotherapist to whom Lisa had told in detail everything that had happened to her and had given her her belongings in the hope of escaping from the tyrant. It was her testimony that was decisive. Gitani was found guilty of murdering his fiancée and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. After the verdict was announced, Rachel Louise threw a tantrum and began to insult the judge, for which she was removed from the room. All attempts by Simon and his lawyers to challenge the court's decision were rejected, and the verdict remained in force. Rachel soon dumped her boyfriend, saying in an interview that it was difficult for them to maintain a relationship in prison, but she remains convinced of his innocence.